Hey folks, welcome to Moonshift Audio. In last week's video, I showed you what went into the production of this lo-fi indie pop song, and this week I'm going to take you through the mix from start to finish. For me, this was a really nice mix. I've been working on a lot of quite sparkly, high-fidelity pop music recently, and it was really nice to do something completely different. The warm, almost muffled tones and the huge amounts of reverb on pretty much every element of this mix made such a nice contrast to some of my other recent mixes, and switching things up a bit is a great way to refresh your ears and get you thinking differently about some of the processes that you might have started to do as a matter of routine, which in mixing is always dangerous. Here's a preview of the mix.
But you know I'm never coming back, no, no. I'm right where I belong.
Before we get stuck into this mixdown, I just want to introduce myself quickly. My name's Jack. I'm a UK-based producer and mix engineer. I put out a video like this every week, so please do like and subscribe. If you're working on your mixing and you're learning here on YouTube, you might be interested in my Mix Exploder service, where I give your tracks a professional mix here in the studio. Then I send you a personalized video just like this one, where I take you from start to finish through the whole mixing process, from my overall approach down to every plugin on every track, so you can see exactly what you need to take your mixes to the next level. There's a link to the Mix Exploder down below, but for now let's jump into Cubase and I'll take you through this mixdown.
Okay, so here we are back with the session, and I'm going to take a look at this mixdown. I really enjoyed the approach that this track sort of led me towards, because it's just so kind of understated. Like, none of the parts really sit in front of any of the others. I didn't feel the need to make this space for an enormous lead vocal, and it's always nice to work in different styles because you can really learn a lot. So to start with, we're going to take a look at the drums, and I'll just play this loop. So we already had the reverb set up from the mix session, but the kick and the snare weren't quite working how I wanted them to. So I employed some more EQ to pull out some more of the lows on that kick drum, which meant I was able to bring it up a little bit in the mix. So if I turn off this band here, and just here, it's just pulling it back a little bit. And I also used a decapitator with the tone pulled down towards the dark side. Just helping bring it out a little bit in the mix. So if I just unsolo the drums, and I bypass those effects. Yeah, so you can really hear. The kick is really just a suggestion at this point. Snare-wise, I found that the tail of the snare coming out of Groove Agent, the drum machine, was actually just a bit too much. So I've employed this envelope shaper just to pull the release down a reasonable amount, pushing 10 dB, so 8.5. So without that, we've got this. And with. And here it's just tightening it up quite nicely. We're EQing that, pulling out some of the mud, taking a little bit of the highs off, and we're rolling off the low end. So this is without the EQ now. Yeah, it's much more punchy and powerful. But that's not the aim of the game in this mix. And lastly, I've got Decapitator, again making use of the tone control to skew this towards the dark end of the spectrum. A little bit of drive there. So this is without. So although it's adding harmonics, it's also taming some of that high frequency energy, which works really nicely. So we'll hear that in the mix. And I'll bypass those bits of processing. It's really nice using processing to take presence away from something, whereas often you might find you spend a lot of time trying to get things to cut through a mix. It's quite refreshing doing the opposite. Hi-hat wise, again, no processing at all. It sat right at the back, but I did just put this little gain automation in, just so it slowly creeps up through the intro. You can hear that hi-hat slowly coming in. And it stays there for the rest of the track. The crash cymbal, I actually pulled some of the highs out. I just wanted to send that back in the mix. I just didn't want anything too sparkly with this one. Moving on to the toms. I pushed these pretty hard through a decapitator. I left the tone control where it was this time. And I also pulled down some of the lows. So we'll hear this first dry. Now with the decap. Can hear there's quite a lot of low end in that low tom. So with the Pro Q. And if I bypass these inserts, just really helping them to cut through in the mix. Bass wise, I ended up coming back to the EQ after listening to my reference tracks because it was sounding actually too full. If we listen to this, I'm going to turn off this low shelf and leave it how it originally was. So we'll hear that's quite a full bass tone. It's not problematic, it's not boomy or resonant, but it is quite full. So by dropping that out, we just kind of help the track return to its quite light, almost thin kind of mix. Similarly, I scooped out even more of the highs because it's really bright at this point. And this, it's just putting a bit of that mid-range back in, interacting with the other bands. And last up, I went for a soothe, just to help tame, working quite hard on some of the low end. Really thinning it out a lot. Could have done that with a dynamic EQ or probably even a normal EQ. But Soothe got me where I wanted to go. And we can take a look at the guitar. So with this element, I actually did a reasonable amount. I pulled in an EQ and I decided to brighten it up quite a lot. So in the production phase, I'd left the EQ pretty much straight. I just brought off some of the lows. But in the mix, I actually wanted it quite a lot brighter. So here we go. Just got that nice jangly high end now, with what is actually quite a serious boost. We've got 10 dBs in a high shelf, and again, didn't want too much of that kind of muddiness area. I decided I wanted to thicken this up, make it even more sort of spacey than the reverb was giving us, so I've put on a dotted eighth note Echo Boy. And now I'll have to delay back. Doesn't need loads. But delays are just such a nice way of adding depth to a sound without getting into that kind of muddy or washed out, indistinct kind of territory that you can get to if you use too much reverb. I also put a soothe on the guitar just to tame a few of the resonances. It's kind of around the pick on string sort of tone I was getting there, that this is really helping to tame. We'll take a look at the pad now. For this bell pad that sits on the top, again I've just taken off some of the highs to get that kind of really warm tone for this track. Almost every element I've pulled off some of the very, very high end, that sort of sizzly, sparkly, airy treble that we just don't need. So you can hear the sparkle there. And it's just much nicer and muted with this EQ in. And that's just supporting the soft pad underneath. Now this I've thickened up with a 8th note Echo Boy on a reasonable amount of mix actually. So if I was to bypass this, and now I'll pull it in, it's on ping pong, which for a very long slow sound like this, you're not going to hear these echoes like bouncing from left to right, but it is going to give you a gentle sense of width and depth. We can take a look at the vocal now. And I replaced my standard kind of production placeholder compressor, the Arvox, with a slightly more involved compression process. So I'm starting off with Blue Stripe 1176. I'll just bypass the other effects.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right. I'm slipping.
So just doing my standard kind of catch the peaks with the first compressor in the chain with this one. Then we go on to the grey face 1176 from Universal Audio. This is a really useful one to have in the toolbox because although I love the silver face version, it's arguably my favourite plugin, but it does add a very particular kind of saturation, and it's a little bit sparkly, and it's quite poppy, and it's quite loud. So when you don't want that kind of presence to come out of your compressor, the grey version is the one to go for. And this is just going to sort of hug that vocal, give it its body, but without giving it too much sparkle.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right. I'm slipping
very transparent, this one.
Underground. The world don't treat me right. I'm
without.
Slipping further underground. The world don't treat me
And
right.
with.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
So that's the vocal held in place nicely by those two compressors. Now we're on to EQ. Pulled out the lows again, scooped out some mud, pulled a little bit of the presence back and just put in some 1K kind of clarity. Here we go.
I'm slipping further underground.
Here's without.
The world don't treat me right. I'm slipping further underground.
It is nice to note that although this vocal was recorded just with an SM58, not having to do too much work EQ-wise for that to sit in the mix. I'm using a Soothe.
I'm slipping further underground.
Just to tame some of those resonances. There is a bit of harshness coming from the mic.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
Then I'm adding a slapback style delay. So I've turned off the note sync here, and usually between sort of 70 and 100 odd milliseconds is good for a slapback. So I'll pull the mix down to 0 so you can hear this coming in.
I'm slipping further underground.
Feedback all the way down.
Don't treat me right. I'm slipping further underground.
And it actually sounds
The world
almost like a reverb.
treat me right.
Got it on the ambient setting, which is a bit more spaced out.
Further underground. The world don't treat me right.
That's dry
I'm slipping further underground.
and wet.
The world don't treat me right.
And I'm just putting a tiny bit of gain in the gain plugin. So that's my vocal chain. I actually did a bit more playing around with the reverb, a couple of the reverbs in this. So if we enable that send,
I'm slipping further underground.
and we come down to the reverb track,
The world don't
I've actually added an echo boy
I'm slipping
on a dotted eighth
underground.
after the reverb.
World don't treat me right.
It's a nice way of sort of extending the reverb tail without getting, again, too much of a wash. It's just a different character to just increasing the decay on the reverb. So I'll play this without.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
And now with.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
Just really helps to increase the size of that space that we're creating with the reverb. The EQ is the same EQ that we put in during the production phase, but I did decide that I wanted a little bit more control over that reverb and the vocal together. In a mix like this, the reverb is so much a part of the vocal sound that I ended up creating a new group track and sending the dry vocal and the vocal reverb to that track so that I could actually EQ them both together. And what I've done there is I've scooped out some of the mud, scooped out some of the presence, and then I've just put these two boosts in to kind of get a bit more control over the shape of those cuts. And if I turn that off,
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
now with,
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
particularly that muddiness area is really cleaned up with this. We can hear that in the context of the mix. So here is, again, without that EQ.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
And now with.
I'm slipping further underground. The world don't treat me right.
Kind of thins it out, but in a pleasant way. That's going to take us now
I'm slipping further underground.
through to the pre-chorus. I'll let this play.
Don't treat me right. Even with no one around, I won't sleep tonight. But you know I'm never coming back, no, no.
I employed a similar trick to that on the reverb from these bells. This is an EQ that we put in the production phase, really rolling off quite a lot of the lows and taking some of the brightness, some of the sparkle off. But if we go down to the bell reverb, you can see that I've also added an echo boy. This one is actually on 100% wet, which means that we are not going to hear the first quarter note of anything coming out of that. So it's effectively adding a kind of pre-delay to the reverb after the fact. Quite a lot of feedback. So we can listen to this without that echo boy. And now with. We get a bit more space around the actual bells, but the tail is absolutely enormous, and the ping pong really helps to add some nice movement left to right and gives us more space in the center of the mix. So if we hear that in context, again, this is without.
Coming back, no, no.
And when it loops around, it will have that delay.
Coming back, no, no. I'm right.
That big delayed reverb tail just really helps to give you this beautiful dreamy ambience around those bells. We're coming back into the intro now.
I'm right where I belong.
perhaps here, this crash cymbal I've sent to that same reverb. It's sending to the drum reverb, which is giving it a small space. And then it's also sending to that bells reverb, which has got the ping pong delay. And it's perhaps more apparent with this sound that you've got that left-right splash. But it works really nicely.
Ones who really care. With all your acquaintances, you won't see me there. And you know it's never coming back, no, no. I'm right where I belong.
A nice little bit of automation to look at here on this last vocal line is just a little bit of a boost. I've done this in other videos, but if I was to delete this, and we'll have a listen to that vocal.
Right where I belong. Right where I belong.
And if I pull this in, so I'm just putting 3 or 4 dBs in as a gentle boost as that note tails off.
Right where I belong. Right where I belong.
And without.
Right where I belong. Right where I
with.
belong. Right where I belong.
Just add some strength to the way that note tails off. And, you know, it's literally the last phrase of the song. So it's nice to have that tail off well into the breakdown.
I'm right where I belong.
And there you have it. That is a lovely, understated, unhyped mix for this lo-fi electro-pop track.
Okay folks, thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, please do like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, resources and downloads from me at Moonshift Audio. Till next time.